Glupa guided her hover barge into the brightly lit room. The gravity level was somewhat uncomfortable for her, but within normal parameters. Still, her slimy bulk wasn't well suited for swift travel in these conditions. As her sensory skin detected sufficient light, she began resolving shapes to match the smells and vibrations she perceived. There was Kikik, her contact, crouching at the bar, a fierce-looking bounty hunter from an extremis Class 2 planet, known for his skill as a procurer of items and people. Glupa nodded the end of her slug-like body towards the bartending biodrone. Supersaturated fructose in water, 2 drops flavor, 4 BI, she requested. Kikik looked around at the commotion, then with a light hop, cleared the 3-meter gap between them. A typical extremis world show-off. Glupa, dear, I have something to show you. This last expedition didn't go as planned. In fact, I'm the only survivor. Glupa's concern was more political and economic than personal. The crew were expendable, but expensive to replace. Kikik, you ventured further into the spiral arm than anyone before, and it's supposed to be empty. How could people die? Kikik's nervous mandible movements gave him away. Glupa almost laughed. Did you find a species? Out there? Tell me more. I love hearing about species from Class G worlds. Her assumption about a civilized gas planet species causing a microbial outbreak was reasonable, as less than 1 in 10,000 worlds with life were outside Class G, and such epidemics were common. Kikik's long, hard look quickly drained Glupa's mirth. No, we found a species that had spread across 4 star systems with inorganic technology. We grabbed 5 individuals for interrogation and study. It was a mistake. They are monsters from a Class 6 extremis world. The fear that gripped Glupa was intense, yet tinged with a streak of disbelief. Extremis worlds were categorized by difficulty of survival for the life they generated, each category being more challenging to endure than the last. Only worlds up to Class 5 had been discovered so far. Surely you cannot be serious. We have not found any technological species on anything over a Class 3, just animals. Standard heavy containment should have proved simple. Kikik sipped at his bowl of juice, spiracles enjoying the 10% nitrogen, 90% neon atmosphere. It was decidedly more reactive than most species were accustomed to, but not quite that of his home planet. Suitably respirated, he continued, Glupa, individuals of this species broke heavy containment on our bioship in less than 1 rest cycle. We had unknowingly captured members with tools present on them, and they produced folding metal, instruments which they used to forcibly destroy, heavy-duty control nodes which were out of sight on the other side of the membranes of each containment unit. They then extracted signal nerves and tortured them in a deliberate manner until the entire containment gland shut down in a rush of painkillers. Kikik gathered himself from this outburst, but he had to continue. Heavy containment membranes on a bioship are impenetrable to species such as myself, let alone you. These individuals were able to rupture them with their manipulators. The gravity of a bioship is nearly 3 times what this station maintains, for the comfort of myself and the displeasure of my crew. But the individuals were able to move and jump with ease, as if they were used to gravities which would crush me. Their violence, it was unspeakable. By now, the entire bar had gathered around Glupa and Kikik, listening to this tale of horror, monsters from the far spiral arm. One slime-like alien released pheromones asking how Kikik survived. I managed to get a translator working and was able to establish communications. They were a biologically related group, and 4 of them demanded we set course for Irvs's. Fearing for my life, I did so. Upon reaching this planet, the biosensors went crazy. The atmosphere, I swear to you, is 78% nitrogen. A wave of astonished murmurs swept through the bar. This had to be an exaggerated tale. No advanced species had developed in an atmosphere with more than 45% nitrogen in noble gases, and that was a race on an isolated Class 3 extremis world. Kikik raised his foreclaws. The hubbub in various sensory flavors subsided. No, that was not the alarming part. What was alarming was that the remaining atmosphere contained 21% oxygen. No creature can survive in a 5% oxygen atmosphere. Glupa's outburst was merely the most vociferous of many expressions of disbelief. They oxidize to death in such conditions. They burn. Kikik laughed, chirping and clicking. Not 21% of 22%, 21% overall. Many patrons simply moved away, dismissing this as a tall tale told to gullible Class G species from the core by a starey ikiktos back from a trip. Kikik shook his foreclaws, trying to regain their attention, but they were all ignoring him, all but Gloopa. So Kikik, what really happened? No lies this time. Kikik disregarded Gloopa, instead tapping a claw on a communicator that then began emitting intense atmospheric pressure waves. When the din had ceased, Gloopa glared at the bounty hunter, about to ask what in space that was. Then Xantha entered. Kikik made a series of exasperated sounds. The Class G species were so thoroughly lacking in intelligence. Across the entire galaxy, from the tiny Class G rocks with some gas to the largest Class G non-gas planets, life had arisen, yet spectacularly failed to progress. There simply wasn't enough pressure to drive improvement. Of course, Kikik knew better, hailing from an extremist planet with genuine biological competition. Gloopa, this isn't the actual specimen. It's a polymer membrane created through unknown means to separate the specimen from most of its surroundings. Inside is the specimen, and her name is Xantha, Kikik said, raising a claw to cut off Gloopa's reply, as she felt the tingles of electromagnetic emissions wash over her. Holding her pheromones was annoying, but she knew how to wait. A second stream of emissions occurred, and then Kikik spoke again. Xantha says hello. She says you appear less strange than some other species. Although Gloopa's species could sense electromagnetic radiation, they had never developed the ability to emit it. Kikik, I don't appreciate having things revealed to me slowly, especially when you make such outlandish claims. So tell me, what is the form of Xantha? What are her primary communication senses? Why does she have to be contained inside this polymer membrane? And is she dangerous? The questions were just on the sane side of sheer terror. Kikik was slightly taken aback by Gloopa's directness. Perhaps she wasn't as stupid as most of her species, and might even be able to think quickly enough to survive on an EI planet, for a brief moment. His tone had shifted from, a holy cow, I have a tale to tell, to a relax, this is fine, as he realized how easily frightened and naive most of the G species in the bar were. I wish I could use optical projection, but I cannot, so we'll have to rely on a description. Xantha is a species calling itself human, and is an immature specimen of the sexually dimorphic, smaller, and weaker female form. He prepared for the first major reveal. Gloopa, this is an endoskeletal sapient. I'm not sure if you know, but this confirms at least a Class 4 extremist world, and even there they are rare for common endoskeletal species. It must be a Class 5 extremist world. A flausin floating nearby emitted humor pheromones at that. The lightweight species contracted its vacuum sacs to increase density and lower itself to Gloopa and Kikik. We'll believe it when we see it. If this species is contained in a membrane, then have it reveal itself. Low-level electromagnetic emissions indicated the flausin was flock-minding. Kikik's translator began emitting pheromones as Xantha spoke up. Excuse me, but I cannot. I would simply not be able to breathe. Kikik has been showing me wonderful new sights, but he needs to talk to his sponsor, so could you please let him continue? The pheromones hung in the air as the electromagnetic emissions that had facilitated the translation ended. With this brief communication, Xantha, and by extension, Kikik and Gloopa, had recaptured the attention of the bar. Flashing lights, pungent pheromones, sub- and ultrasonic sounds all signaled a steady fear and apprehension among the bar patrons. From one corner rose a particular alien with a serious objection to the trio stirring up the patrons. Sensibly, a path was made, for this was Feral Scent, another bounty hunter. Feral Scent, a chaser of prey, a powerful winged exoskeletal species from a Class 3 extremist world, would have had no trouble murdering and eating Kikik after a short and one-sided fight, let alone the G's that mostly filled the bar. Resembling H.R. Geiger's cross between a dragonfly and a centipede, Feral Scent buzzed up to Xantha. The pheromones warned of violence and pleasure. Whatever you are, I can kill you where you stand. I don't like the sound of you. You're weak E2 or the G-slug. I'm bringing the three of you in to a research facility where you can be dissected. Don't resist. I'd hate to lower your value through trauma. Xantha ignored the bounty hunter she didn't know and turned to the one she did, shrugging. Kikik was nervous, having a one-class disadvantage in homeworlds, but Xantha's air of absolute nonchalance from ignorance was appropriate for a species originating on a world far harsher than that of feral scent. Kikik quickly sent a translation to Xantha, and then he backed off quickly. Gloopa, watching the standoff, quickly hovered further away, and most other Gs in the bar spread apart, as extremist species were dangerous. Feral Scent watched as the small exoskeleton-clad creature turned to him, raised its manipulators, and spread its lower limbs apart. A translation of its response drifted over from where Kikik and Gloopa had retreated. "I'm not going anywhere with you. Just try it. I'm 14 and know a bully when I see one," the translation conveyed. The strike came from a hinged jaw, but Xantha's arm blocked it, stopping the attack dead. Kikik visibly shook, reminded again of the horror on the exploration ship as a second strike, easily enough to puncture his carapace, was deflected by Xantha. Feral Scent's assault intensified, but was unable to even rock Xantha's stance until it charged her, a full-body assault with snapping jaws and swinging claws. Xantha was pushed back slightly, appearing to falter, until with a violent speed akin to a chemical explosion, she rammed her shoulder up into Feral Scent's thorax. Pushing off the floor hard enough to lift Feral Scent's body, her leap ended with a sickly crunch and splatter of internals, as Feral Scent was driven into the fleshy roof 10 meters above. As the pair of fighters fell, the onlookers could see that the impact had been hard enough to fatally rupture Feral Scent's internals and carapace. Outright terror gripped the bar. A being who had mortally wounded an E3 bounty hunter with a single attack was right there. Patrons fled as fast as they could, and Kikik grabbed both Xantha and Gloopa. "I think it's time we left this station," Kikik said. The genus Risturm contained a number of large radiation-proof species with a variety of interesting internal fluid mechanisms. Although too large to effectively travel through higher dimensions, they made incredibly useful biostations, or if gravity and atmosphere allowed it, planetary outposts. The particular station that Gloopa, Kikik, and Xantha were on could be described as a sphere, approximately 1,500 meters in diameter, with a wide membrane ring around it, extending another 3,000 meters radius into space, which the organism used for temperature regulation. Defining this as the equator allowed orientation to the bioship docks at one pole and propulsion orifices at the other. The areas of the station near the temperature membrane attachment were sparsely populated, and it was here that Kikik had brought his two companions. The room was relatively small, but it was out of the way, secure, and lacked any decent nervous connections. It would be acceptable to lay low for a bit. The frantic rush in which the three of them had managed to outpace the rumors was only aided by most of the species who had been present lacking the ability to provide a good description of them. Additionally, a number of them were simply staying completely quiet about it all out of fear. Kikik sat down and began cleaning his mandibles, a nervous act for a Thruskin. Gloopa slimed a little faster than usual, her bulk shivering. Once they were all in the hideout, Xantha confronted Kikik angrily. "What was that? You told my parents I'd be safe, that nothing would harm me, and then this thing attacks me." Kikik didn't have a good response, instead just sitting for a moment to think. Gloopa was unsure of what to say, coming from a race which preferred mass accumulations. "Xantha, that was someone who attacked you, and would have easily dragged Kikik and I off to be sold to whoever would pay for us. Thank you for doing what you did. You saved us." Xantha's head lifted slightly at this, and Gloopa turned to Kikik. "Now, dear Kikik, finish answering my questions from before. I'm confused, frightened, angry, and now I've had to exert myself." Presented with something he could handle, Kikik leaned forward a touch and tried to think over the questions. "Right, so like I said, Xantha is an endoskeletal bipedal, being with 2 extra limbs, allowing gross and fine manipulation. She breathes a gas mixture that is 22% oxygen and reacts it to power biochemistry. Put away those shocked pheromones. Yes, this is a species which burns to stay alive." Gloopa's reaction had been disbelief mixed with abject terror, but calmed by Kikik and secure that this atmosphere was decidedly less reactive than what would be needed for fire, she bade him continue. A fuller description of what a human looked like followed, and Kikik decided to limit the revelation of capabilities to what Xantha could do, The mature male he had witnessed was both much larger and much stronger. So that's what they look like now, Gloopa. Kikik tried to phrase sight in terms a smell and sound-dependent species could understand. Xantha is an optically dominant creature, almost terrifyingly so. I have seen her track objects passively through a nearly hemispherical space with binocular tracking. She has reacted to wavelengths of 390 to 700 millimeters, and these are just what I have observed of her capabilities so far. Gloopa swayed a little, but turned to Xantha, as it was polite to ask the terrifying thing directly about if you could experiment on it. Xantha, has Kikik told you much about the rest of the galaxy? Gloopa was sure he had kept her ignorant. It was his style, but Gloopa could tell Xantha wasn't a direct danger at the moment and would probably be cooperative if not pressured. The translator's response from Kikik came quickly and fluidly, prompting Gloopa and Kikik to ask Xantha to slow down, as the pheromones could not handle that level of communication. On the second attempt, however, Xantha's message came through clearly. No, he did not tell me much, only that we were the first humans he had seen, and that if any of us wanted, we could explore with him, as there would be no danger. There were many interesting things and species to see, and they were all harmless. I've never seen a ship made of meat before. Gloopa was slightly surprised, wondering how humans had colonized four-star systems without bioships. She stored the thought in her chemical memory and continued. Xantha, life is not difficult to start. It often occurs when the conditions are favorable enough. The first spacefaring species began near the core of this galaxy and have slowly expanded outward. Considering what to tell the human, Gloopa decided on the truth, as lies were too risky with an E6 species. Of every 10,000 life-bearing worlds, most contain generic life, in 10 classes I through X, based on factors like gravity and chemical processes. I am a G7 species from an asteroid belt. However, about 1 in 10,000 of these worlds with life will be much harder to live on, with reactive atmospheres, high gravity, ultraviolet exposure, molten cores, and other dangers. These are known as extremist worlds. Gloopa gestured to Kikik, who knew he had to be truthful, as the pheromones had told him. Yes, extremist worlds are more challenging to survive on. They are categorized by difficulty. So far, the Association of Spacefaring Species has only encountered sapient life on worlds up to Class E3. Your world is the first Class of 6 the Association has encountered. Most worlds like yours are Class D, or dead worlds. But you're from a Class E, which means you are a remarkably powerful species. The revelation lingered, yet the response was so reassuring and human. Xantha stood, hands on her hips, and asked, So what? What now? Biostation 468, affectionately known as Farek, was the remotest station in the Guan Yu area, one of the farthest regions of the Fringe. It was a haven for the dregs, remnants, opportunists, and generally dangerous or endangered beings. The station buzzed with gossip, shared through flashing lights, electromagnetic waves, touch, flock-minding, sound, gesture, and countless other variations. Class G beings shuddered at the violence and strength, unable to comprehend what had occurred. The stories had mutated into flights of fantasy, the details lost. EI beings remained wary, keeping to their broods and areas, knowing their numbers would protect them from E2 or E3 monsters. A posse of Zeus beings from various species had formed the hunting party. There were 2 Thruskins like Kikik, a trio of Yberk whose broodmind filled the air with intense psychic pressure as they brachiated along the corridor's roof. The aggressive, armored Minbo known as Diskash trundled behind, resembling a woodlouse scaled up to the size of a small car. Gloopa had maneuvered her hover barge into the corridor after the posse had passed, the barge's exhalation forming an air cushion that supported her bulk. Thankfully, the posse seemed unaware of her presence. Xantha and Kikik remained hidden near the equator, and the question of what to do weighed heavily on Gloopa's mind. They needed to leave the station, but Xantha's ship was docked far away, and she was too recognizable. Perhaps a small deception was in order, passing her off as a new EI species. Extremist worlds were uncommon, but new ones were still being discovered. The priority was to get away and let the incident with feral scent fade. The hover barge drifted along, emitting soft, contented burbles as Gloopa manipulated the controls. It was only when Gloopa managed to emerge from her deep contemplation that she could finally re-register her sensory inputs. The posse had surrounded her. 6 E2 beings encircled a Zequan from a G7 planet. Gloopa had no choice but to halt and attend to them. The pheromones emitted by the Thruskins conveyed the message, "Look, Gloopa, we know you sponsor Kikik, so just take us to him, and we can sort out this entire mess. Any one of us could do you in, but we'd prefer to think we're better than Feral Scent. They were a violent bully and probably a killer, but there are laws, and we have to uphold the association out here." Gloopa protruded some soft-stalked gesticulators and waved at the Yibberk, indicating she would comply. Diskash, seemingly disappointed by the lack of violence, turned and departed on their numerous limbs. "Kikik is in a gas node near the temperature membrane here on Farik. I have to warn you, you outnumber him 5-1. You do not threaten Xantha. Let me talk to them before we make this any worse." The powerful broodminding of the Yibberk caused Gloopa physical discomfort, though mercifully it was brief as they started to brachiate rapidly down the corridor. The closest Thruskin offered an amicable gesture. "Well, Gloopa, I am Huppel. I think we can work this out." By the time Gloopa and the Thruskins had reached where she had left Xantha and Kikik, there was a tense scene in progress, with Kikik trying to assure Xantha, who was clearly upset, that nothing was going to go wrong. The Yibberk racing around the ceiling did not help, but as soon as Huppel told them to leave the area, the three of them seemed to agree that it was for the best. "Why? What is happening? Who are these things?" Xantha's questions came rapidly, and no answers were coming. Thruskins were poorly suited to this kind of interaction. Gloopa entered the conversation hoping she could assure the human. "This is Xantha. She is a human." She turned to Xantha. "These are some Thruskins, like Kikik, and they have been looking for us to sort out what happened in the bar." Xantha's visor flicked to a transparent hue, and the aliens got a good look at the human. Xantha's skin was a deep brown, with large, sharp, and highly mobile forward-facing eyes situated in the middle of the exposed skin. Huppel marveled at their evolutionary complexity, unable to identify certain biological features. Why, for instance, did the size of the black center change? He also noted a protrusion below the eyes, and an opening that was presumably a mouth. There were no prominent mandibles or fangs, leading him to assume this being was some kind of herbivore. Strands of fur in blue, green, pink, and black fell across the visible skin, perhaps serving as sexual signaling. Huppel recovered quickly and began his questioning. "The Farik posse was looking for you because several beings alleged you killed Feral Scent." The reply was halting, but as it came through the translation, Huppel's focus shifted from "what happened" to "what is this being?" Kikik interjected. "See? It's a straightforward defensive act. Xantha was simply much stronger than Feral Scent, and her species has evolved in a much higher gravity. Your posse doesn't have the law on its side, and I doubt you could restrain her if you wanted. I've tried. I've failed. What are you going to do?" The statements were delivered in a very reasonable tone, but the translation Xantha was listening to either omitted it or the words themselves provoked her. "No, you can't lock me up. I'll get my dad to come and break you all up. He broke all the other aliens that tried to hold us. We'll break up your ship too." The 4 aliens moved away from the human. Xantha had taken a stance of spreading her legs, bending them, and bringing her body closer to the floor. Her arms were away from her body, with her fine manipulators balled. Huppel looked blankly at his associate, then at Kikik. Gloopa addressed the Thruskins, trying to prevent anyone from being harmed by someone she was certain was a very high-class extremist world species. "Smell, Kikik, Huppel, and Sip-Tip were just making it worse. Do not threaten Xantha, please. I hope we've sorted that this is not something the posse needs to deal with, and trying would be, well, a poor idea." The notion struck Gloopa in an unexpected way, for she knew her kind were not renowned for their aptitude in conceiving novel ideas. "Are you two currently engaged in any bounties?" When the reply came back negative, Gloopa continued, "Would you be willing to take employment with me and travel to the nearest association world, so we may attend to the necessary formalities?" Huppel and Sip-Tip looked at each other and made the Thruskin equivalent of a shrug. We have nothing here to keep us, and we were in any case headed back to 198 Oasis to collect. We shall accompany you. The walk through the biostation to the docking bays was filled with subdued communication around them, as reckless Class G beings trailed in their wake. While the other E3 beings on the station did attempt to impede their progress, the Thruskins were able to truthfully state that they were escorting Xantha to 198 Oasis. It was Xantha who appeared the least concerned about the journey, having seemingly regained her composure. Glupa was amazed at Xantha's ability to transition so swiftly between violent and calm states. But violence was something that happened to Zequans, not something they themselves enacted. Glupa, what did the posse mean by association? The question caught Glupa off guard, as she was occupied with guiding the hover barge and contemplating the recent events. Gathering her thoughts, she managed to provide a response after only a brief pause. It is a sort of agreement between species. It grants rights and powers to beings so that they generally lack sufficient reason to engage in a large-scale conflict, which in turn safeguards most of us who are ill-equipped for such confrontations. Whenever we encounter a new species, we bring some of them to an association world so that we may all learn about one another. Do I get to learn about other species? I have a copy of what humans know on this data stick. Xantha, conceal that. Conceal it and never reveal it to anyone, Kikik interjected, his tone laced with apprehension. The capabilities and knowledge of your kind are too vast and perilous to be handled carelessly. Your species will bring about profound transformations, and the process has already begun. The journey to the far side of the biostation was relatively quiet. Xantha had silenced her translator alien and walked alongside the two Thruskins, Hupple, and Sip-Tip, while Kikik led the way and Glupa's hover barge floated behind them. Though conversation filled the air, Xantha ignored it, lost in deep thought. She had never felt such a sense of isolation before. Being told that her species and their knowledge were considered dangerous was a troubling concept for a 14-year-old. Xantha had not encountered the innate fear that some of the new aliens had displayed, which she would have recognized as xenophobia if she were older. Instead, she felt ashamed. Xantha's pace was a steady shuffle, but the others still had to work to keep up. Her thoughts swirled until they reached a breaking point, and she stopped abruptly, causing Glupa's barge to bounce off, unable to halt in time. Pressing a food pellet into the translator alien attached to her wrist, Xantha spun around and confronted Glupa directly. Glupa, why is my species considered dangerous? Why is our knowledge dangerous? Why must I be silent? The heat and anger in her tone were accurately conveyed, and the general hum of activity in the wide corridor they were passing through fell silent. Glupa placed a manipulator on Xantha's arm. Xantha, we must move. Some believe you can be used as a tool to use your species' knowledge to harm others. Humans have knowledge alien to us. Xantha began walking toward the bioship docks. Her outburst had passed, but her sense of alienation only grew. Her response, after a long silence, was naive yet curious. Glupa, you ride a living platform. I have a translator. We're on a vast space station, and we got here by teleportation. What could humans know that would be alien to you? Reaching the checkpoint, Glupa found relief from navigating the hover barge. We grow things, but don't know how they work. We just breed what works better. We have no idea how our ships work. We stand on a floor, but don't know how gravity works here. The Thruskins, smarter than Glupa, continued. Xantha, we Thruskins evolve weapons, but have never built anything deliberately. A few species build dwellings and farms, and we know of metals, but have never made them into specific shapes for a purpose. Xantha's tiredness and mental funk had cleared away into a state of confusion. She reached down to a pouch on her waist and pulled her multi-tool on its tether of fiber wire. Pressing the button on the side in the specific manner, the knife blade sprung out. It wasn't a weapon, a short 11 centimeters blade meant for cutting lines or packaging, but Xantha stared at it. This small tool, common, indefensible, and metal, technology barely changed over thousands of years, was something she had that the aliens simply did not. Kikik, Glupa, I think I am starting to realize the difference between us is vastly greater than I thought. I don't even have to look up the data stick to know how to identify iron and build a crude smelter. It's a basic skill taught to children. With her time conversing with the aliens, She was able to start to recognize when the translation alien had failed to convey something. A kind of metal we use often, and a tool for making it more pure. The knife snapped closed, and a tug on the leash sent it zipping back into the pouch. Sorry for my outbursts. It's just hard to get used to being so different. Is it much further to the bioships? I'm hungry and would like to be away from so many people. The Thruskins looked at each other and clicked in a private language, with Kikik and Sip-Tip peeling off, while Hupple, Gloopa, and Xantha remained in line. We're just off to find something you might be able to eat. The line for the checkpoint was moving slowly, and so Gloopa made assenting pheromones. I'm sure you'll make it back before anything interesting happens. The checkpoint was a thrumming hub of activity, as a myriad of life forms swarmed around one of the most active areas on Ferric. Bureaucratic form filling was required and completed. Names, identification numbers, species were standard. More arcane questions relating to items such as innovative acquisitions were glossed over, but the section on required habitats and chemical support was filled out in detail. The delay was significant as Gloopa attempted to reason with the alien at the checkpoint that yes, a room of 21% oxygen was not a security risk. Okay, maybe it was. Okay, yes, it was the explosion waiting to happen, but we only want it for one room. The visitor was an Oni, a species of natural fold jumpers who employed this ability to sustain airborne movement for their spherical forms. As one of the few E3 members on Ferric, the Oni possessed the strength to back the responsibility and power of the position. Weary of the Zequan's tirade, it turned to the Thruskins who accompanied the unidentified alien. Kikik, what's happening here? Don't try to get past me. We know how that went last time. You're aware I cannot simply allow people to move about without proper records and reasons. The Oni and Kikik exchanged a meaningful pheromone exchange, both perceiving a way to circumvent the issue. The tones and hues of the conversation shifted from suspicion to amicable understanding. Once inside the bioship docks, Xantha finally laid eyes on the exterior of a standard biomass cruiser. She stood in wonder at the unsettling alienness of the sight. The bioship possessed a massive, blunt, hardened dome carapace at the front, a pockmarked and scarred bone mass that resisted impact and heat equally well. Behind this came the ship itself, a long, tapering spire of flesh, with bulging gas sacs of propellant, huge fatty deposits, and a mass of tentacles around the electromitter orifice. Over 200 meters long and 25 meters in diameter, the bioship dwarfed even the largest human vessels. Even the largest human ships were less than half the length, and evidently much less massive. Only one of the 3 dock points were occupied, and her mind wandered as she imagined what other ships could look like. It was only when Sip-Tip grabbed her wrist and pulled her onwards. Xantha's cargo was being loaded on under tarpaulins. The metal crates would have generated far too much interest, and with a number of bands of E-Toru species, and confrontation could have spiraled out of control easily. From the dock floor, the group ascended a small spiral to where the Ferric was bitten by the mouthpiece of the bioship. Currently, the interface had been blocked from transferring material, but shortly before departure, heavy animal oils and sugars would be pumped into the bioship to induce the parasite to release. There were many aliens embarking on this ship, as it was traveling towards one of the largest and nearest association worlds. And as a transport, it was very full of both cargo and passengers. The rooms that the group had been given would serve both as cabins and holds for their cargo. One was even able to be flooded with a high oxygen in nitrogen mixture. Kikik sat, holding a plant-like alien over the openings he allowed to remain exposed. This acted as a biological filter, permitting only a diminished amount of the atmospheric nitrogen to reach his biology. Even so, his carapace was gradually reacting to the air. He supposed the effort might be worthwhile, as he also had a small creature whose holographic defense mechanism proved an excellent recording device after extensive breeding. Xantha danced, leaping about the room in only a small amount of covering material that exposed her dark brown skin to the air once more. Oh, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for allowing me out of my spacesuit. Kikik, not feeling well enough to move much, simply replied, Well, I'm glad I can properly see you now. It will be good to show Gloopa, Hupple, and Sip-Tip. He did not mention being somewhat unsettled by the speed and precision she could casually bring to bear. Some of those spins and leaps could make for effective attacks, if he understood humans correctly, with their limbs as the primary combat form, rather than their vestigial claws or nearly non-existent fangs. "Xantha, you should rest now. We still have a long distance to travel before being far enough from the biostation to full jump. It will take time for the ship to prepare, then propel itself there, and finally burn the necessary fats for the full jump." Kikik was about to leave Xantha to her small polymer devices when a question arose from her hurried series of queries and taps. "Kikik, what is a full jump?" Full jumping was not fully understood, but bioships and certain species like the Oni could perform it. It required substantial sustenance for something large to full jump, and the further the distance, the more isolated the start and end points had to be. Kikik stalled, performing a series of motions such as cleaning his eyes and claws, as he tried to recall what he knew. Full jumping is a capability that some species possess, where they can instantly relocate from one place to another. We have bred from small, full-jumping creatures the size of your flies all the way up to these bioships. The mechanics of it are not fully understood, but it is a useful means of travel for us. More questions came from Xantha, but simple confusions reigned on both sides. "Well, I'm quite intrigued to learn more about this, as it sounds akin to teleportation. Could you please convey my gratitude to Gloopa for this room? It's so refreshing to be able to breathe properly here." Kikik was beginning to feel the atmosphere irritating his carapace, much like an acid might, and shuddered at the thought of a being enjoying the powerful breaths Xantha was taking. Her body was expanding and contracting significantly. Was she actively pumping the air in and out? He made a mental note to ask Gloopa to study that, but for now, the only thing he wanted was to leave Xantha's burning room and her peculiar biology behind. Passing through the airlock membranes, Kikik removed the filter plant alien and looked at the sign Gloopa had asked the Thruskins to place. "Extremis afor animal, exceedingly dangerous." The more Kikik learned about Xantha, the more uneasy he felt around her. She was pleasant enough, but something about her put him on edge. It was fortunate that she was easy to get along with and willing to let them take the lead. The older male, significantly taller, over twice the mass and indescribably strong, would have been a total catastrophe. How fortunate that humans live beyond the fringe and cannot full jump, Kikik mused to himself as he bounced through the low gravity back to the rest of the group. Xantha had mentioned that there were 20 billion humans, a truly daunting prospect. Despite the dangerous label on Xantha's room, they knew it to be an understatement. The deep shudder that rocked the ship announced their detachment from Ferric, while the deep EM hum that obliterated communications on that sense informed everybody who could perceive it that the electromitter organs were active, and they were moving out into empty space. Was the introduction of humans to the association the right course of action? It was too late to turn back now. The species' behavior when forced out of their natural tendencies reveals much about them. Aliens that seem meek and friendly turn violent, while those that are grumpy and recluse open up. Some even have nervous breakdowns. Inside the cavities of the bioship, there was no meaningful way to track the passage of time, but it wasn't long before the ship fever had set in. Kikik raised his claws and circled the room, matching the movements of Hupple on the other side. Both Thruskins were warrior drones, males who ranged far to find females and mate with them. Being cooped up in the bioship had triggered their natural behaviors of engaging in mortal combat on sight. Xantha positioned herself between the two, her armored suit raised to keep them apart. Neither tried to fight their way past her, with her clear advantage. She was preventing the aliens from attempting to bite each other's heads off. "Why are you two doing this? You were okay before?" The confused girl had been forced into the role of diplomat as Gloopa had slimed herself out into the vacuum, and Sip-Tip was only too eager to attack the victor. Kikik twitched forward violently, not quite a probing attack, but enough that Xantha's reactive defense caught his limb and sent him reeling backwards, screeching in pain at the cracked exoskeleton. It was not a major wound, but enough to break the tension. Hupple relaxed his stance now that Kikik was no longer a threat. "I'm not going to fight him now, but I was about to kill him. Thruskins just get like that when certain castes are held together. It'll be okay if we keep away from each other." The wounded Kikik made assenting colors and began regurgitating some kind of sealant putty over the wound as it leaked gooey fluid. The tense atmosphere remained as each watched the others drift to far parts of the chamber. Kikik, Hupple, and Sip-Tip traded looks with mild shame, their tendencies to kill muted by the knowledge that there were no females nearby. Xantha sat with her knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around herself. She wished beyond hope that there might be someone on this entire ship she could truly understand. When she had said goodbye to her mum, dad, and 2 younger brothers, she simply hadn't known the overwhelming sense of solitude that would follow. The aliens were so foreign, so unlike anything she had expected. Popular depictions had not prepared her for their truly alien nature. In all her travels, Xantha had not encountered a single quad-limbed biped. Instead, she found only soft, carapaced creatures whose biology she could scarcely relate to. Desperate for distraction, Xantha inserted a data stick into her suit's uniport. The electronics buzzed to life, the liquifilm display inside her helmet showing the standard startup metrics. She dismissed them and pulled up the definition for a term she remembered: solitary confinement. It was a historical punishment, she learned, where a human was held alone with no other humans to talk to or touch. Did space travel hurt everyone as much as it hurt her? Xantha sighed and tried to occupy herself with media about her family, but watching it on the liquifilm display felt inadequate. She didn't feel like retrieving her projector. Almost all of the Class G species on the bioship reverted to instinctive behaviors and would be stuck like that until they left the unnatural surroundings. On biostations, there were areas where each species could make itself more or less comfortable and instill enough resemblance to their evolutionary surroundings that they could conduct advanced interactions. Class E species were more adaptable due to their evolutionary history and handled space travel better. Short-term regressions were still common, although frequency decreased with increased class. Xantha's ability to tolerate the 3 Thruskins had been extended by memories and recordings of her family, but lacking the natural support group, she stood and reverted to another basic human behavior: exploration. Kikik, I'm going for a walk. She did not know it, but this was the breaking down the advanced behaviors of a E6 species. Why, do you need to exercise yourself? Can you not do it in here? The reply from the alien was curious, but not overly interested. No, Kikik, it would be too small anyway. I just need to have a look around, see more of the ship. Xantha paused as it was clear that the alien didn't understand it. Imagine going looking for something, but you don't know what it is or where it might be, and it's more about the looking than the finding. A shrug punctuated the comment as she stroked the skin beside the chamber's membrane valve, causing it to snap open. The corridors of the bioship were empty and still. At least they were large, and the minor gravity did not slow her down. The light footfalls became heavier, and Xantha's stride lengthened as her speed increased. Other species would be rightfully horrified that running was a basic human behavior. Xantha bounded from position as the bioship's biology twisted and turned. Despite this, she was still well-orientated and calmly knew she could retrace her steps. Sighting a heavy armored sphincter at an intersection, Xantha let her rapid dash peter out. She approached the battle-scared carapace marked by acid, claws, and parasites, but was cut off by a trio of Minbo. They were shuffling around aggressively, but Xantha was determined to talk to them anyway. Thoughts of exploration, the thrill of running, and familial loneliness had been quickly replaced by the curiosity of an advanced mind.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.